Hey.
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 Hey. Yeah. Good. Calling Chris Anderson. Where are you?
I'm in Boston.
In Boston.
And oddly enough, you look like you're in Boston too.
I am.
It's
Welcome to Boston.
Welcome to Boston. Thank you.
And that's the Old North Church behind us. One if by land, two if by sea.
Yes.
I am the opposite shore will be.
Oh, sorry.
Welcome everybody to History Happy Hour, brought to you with the help of Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours. Check out their rich offering of military history tours at StephenAmbroseTours.com. And we are on a Stephen Ambrose tour.
Right now.
We are going to start leading, actually today's Sunday, right? Sunday. So we're actually pretty right here right now. But with 60 other people.
Yeah, watching.
Doing a 250th anniversary Battle of Lexington tour. And we want to say thank you, by the way, to all of our Patreon supporters,
as always.
Especially our top shelf supporters. We appreciate that. Some of them are on this trip. Thank you. Why aren't you watching? Yes, or maybe you're watching afterward. I don't know. You know, all this time shift stuff is a little complicated, so it's hard to us to figure out. And whether you're watching live, watching on replay, or listening on the HHH podcast. We appreciate your being here.
We absolutely do.
Yeah, so today we have an encore episode with our friend Don Farrell. So you were just in the Pacific. Did you see Don?
I did. Don was with our group, and it was a lot warmer in the Pacific.
It was. You didn't have to wear that big heavy coat or that funny neck scarf you're wearing.
But I've got like color here, so by my standards, I do.
This is you with a tan?
This is me with a tan.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's great to see that.
Yeah.
Wow. Have a drink. Let us know what you're drinking.
Yeah.
Say hello in the chat, and I think what?
No, I think
we're ready to go.
Where are you?
Give me a cue.
The bar is open. What?
Bar is open. It's really open today.
It's starting to feel like French internet. Oh yeah.
I wanted to. Yeah.
Okay. Oh hey, listen. We teased this a little bit, but this week we're really excited to have a history happy hour repeat. Don Farrell is joining us, and Don, for those of you who don't know, has written exhaustively on campaign in the Marianas during World War II. It is probably safe to say that he is a world authority on the topic, and we're here to talk with him about his new book, Seabees and Superforts at War, Tinian's critical role in the ultimate defeat of Japan. And the other thing that I also wanted to mention about Don's book before we get him on is that Don was kind of my mentor and guide through what I've talked about for years about the Marianas. So I'm very, very grateful to him for that. And also, I want to say that any mistakes I make on tour when I talk about Tinian or the Marianas are Don's fault. So, Don, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Don.
No responsibility.
Hey, Don.
It's a pleasure.
It's 6 a.m. where you are, so I guess chances are you don't have a cocktail. I do want to just say I'm going to show. I've got my Glen Kinchy Distillery glass with Glen Kinchy 12-year Scotch in it. So cheer. We got this at a tasting. Cheers to you.
Well, at least you're not drinking that crummy beer you usually drink, so that's good.
I'll never forget those very wonderful and important chats we always had after the day's tour down at the lounge at the Outrigger, listening to the veterans tell their stories.
Right. Yeah.
No,
I'm glad that we could remember those chats at the Outrigger.
Oh yeah, that was wonderful. Will you be with us again this year?
Yes, God will.
Good. Look forward to seeing you in March in person.
Hey, the weather's much better where you are.
Actually, we're just at the beginning of the rainy season. We're in that squally in-between period. Right now, we've got a little bit of drizzle, but then it'll turn sunny for a week, and then it'll drizzle again until sometime next month when the real rains set in.
I want to know when they end, because when I go to Tinian, I like the tropical paradise part, not the monsoon part.
The very best time of the year here is anytime from January to June.
All right.
And
good
Easter is always beautiful.
All right. I'll hold you to that. So Don, I want to get in here because there's so much to talk about with your book. And you've got a great introduction by Richard Frank. So, some pretty impressive dudes.
We met him
in the introduction. Frank said, okay. And you set him straight.
No, vice versa.
So there's a bit of a delay, so just bear with me here. But it's in the introduction. You say, or Frank says, your story, the story of Tinian, illustrates very fundamental issues of the war with Japan. These issues are distance and nothingness. What does he mean by that, and what's Tinian's part in this?
Well, fundamentally, the Mariana Islands are strategically located in the Western Pacific. We are about 1,500 miles from Tokyo, a little less than that, maybe 1,300 miles from Tokyo, about the same distance from Manila, about 2,000 miles north of Australia, and about 3,000 miles from Hawaii, a little more than 3,000 miles from Hawaii. So the distances that the military, that the Navy had to travel to fight the war in the Pacific was a huge logistical problem. And especially when you have so many ships of so many different kinds, especially a large aircraft carrier fleet, huge amounts of fuel would be necessary to refuel them along the way, and particularly after the battle started here. So the logistical problems of being able to fight the war in the Pacific were huge, and were overcome by the United States primarily because of President Roosevelt's ability to stimulate the beginnings of Americans' military-industrial complex to turn out enough ships and planes and our training facilities to train the men to be able to run those ships and fly those planes. It's a huge logistical problem. And the Japanese simply didn't think that we could do it. But along with their Bushido Code, they could never use the word defense in any message they sent. It implied that they were losing. And so they would not pay attention to our development, battle fleet and all of that until it was too late. So that by the time the fleet was created and moved to Kwajalein and Eniwetok for the preparations to come to the Marianas, they were out of sync. And we had fought our way through Tarawa and some other battles. So the fleet had been tested, the Marines had been tested, the pilots had been tested, and our logistical structure had been tested, just moving the fleet from Hawaii to the Marshall Islands and onto those atolls for the launch against the Marianas. So we were well set, and I want to emphasize one particular point that was critical, and that was the establishment of unity of command in America between the Navy and the Air Force and all of the services. And the way they came together in the planning for Operation Forager, the campaign for the Marianas, was magnificent. The amount of planning that went into it was huge. And it was because of our nation's ability for our Army and our Navy to work together that we were able to defeat Japan, because their Navy and their Army wouldn't talk to each other.
Don, we're going
to like Rick and I.
Yeah. We're gonna get into the stuff that happened on Tinian there, but I'd like to just, some of our audience has been with you on tour, and some of them are seeing you here today for the first time with your Green Bay Packers hat on. Not even realize that you are talking to us from the island of Tinian in the Pacific, one of our most far-flung guests. How long have you lived there? How did you get there? I mean, how did you end up there? And how did you become a historian of the Navy and the U.S. military effort in that part of the Pacific?
Do we have 2 or 3 hours for this? It's a humorous story. I've tried to make it as short as I can. I was teaching at an upper middle class school in Southern California in the mountains up above San Bernardino. It's called Hillcrest High School. It's on the road up to Big Bear, just above the snow line. And it was a good teaching assignment. It was my first, and it was a good school and a good teaching assignment. But I walked by the office one day, and there was a poster that said, "Teachers Needed." Well, I didn't really need a job, but I was curious enough to read it, and didn't say much, but it said Guam. Well, this is pre-internet days, so I had to go to the library. You remember libraries in schools? and then they have a set of books there that you can look at, A, B, C, D, that you pull them off and it talks. Oh, that's called an encyclopedia. It's actually a book, right? So I found the G, and I went to GUAM. They had 2 paragraphs. One had an American flag in it, and I said, well, you speak English. The other one had its absolute coordinates. Well, I looked at those coordinates for a second, and I said, shit, that's coral reef country. Jacques Cousteau, watch out, here I come. My degree is actually in biology with emphasis in marine biology and a minor in mathematics. So anyway, the veteran teachers around me thought I was crazy, but I was 30 years old and looking for a change in life. And here it was. And that I've been diving cold California water for 5 years. And here was a chance to dive with no wetsuits, right, in clear water. And so I took it, and that brought me to Guam. And I did not rent a house or an apartment. I bought a boat, moved aboard, and lived in Apra Harbor for 3 years. And they assigned me to a southern school, right, one of the traditional locations, right, where Chamorro culture really is still held and still practiced, to have my first teaching assignment there. So instead of moving into one of the villages up north near GW High School or JFK High School, I was down in the south at Inarajan Junior High, right in the midst of the Chamorros who had been so devastated by the atrocities that committed by the Japanese during their occupation. And I finally got to be friends with some of the elders there and asked them if these stories of the atrocities were true. And after a little while, and maybe a couple of more rounds on the table, they started telling me the stories as they had lived them. And that was the beginning.
So speaking of that, Don, and as a place to start, I know some of our viewers know this already, but not enough, I would say. How is it that this tiny island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean becomes Japanese? What's that all about?
Well, that was very legitimate. At the beginning of World War I, 1914, the United States immediately declared neutrality. Right? Remember, they did not join the First World War until April of 1917. In the meantime, Japan saw an opportunity to advance themselves in the Pacific, and so they immediately confirmed to their ally at that time, Japan, that they were in the war. And what did they need to do? In the meantime, they sent a cruiser detachment with landing forces and into China to begin fighting against the Japanese, particularly in the Korean Peninsula, which always was a threat to Japan. But they also captured the Mariana Islands and all of the German islands north of the equator. After World War I, the United States Senate refused to ratify the treaty ending the war that was drafted by President Woodrow Wilson. It was completely a political affair. And as a result, the United States never joined the League of Nations. Well, the League led, and this action was led by England and Italy and Holland, the Dutch. When Japan asked for permission to administer the former German islands, German Micronesia, it was granted. So they were given the authority to manage the Mariana Islands along with the rest of German Micronesia by the League of Nations. They did not capture it. They were legitimately given it the same way the United States gave the same territories to the United Nations after the war as the trust territory of the Pacific Islands. So Japan legitimately was given control of the Northern Marianas, and that they could not fortify the islands. That was a basic part of the Class C mandate. So they had to install a civilian government, and you put a civilian government from Japan in there, and they're just like the United States. The first thing they look for is an opportunity to make money. And they came up with the idea of planting sugarcane there. They were already in the sugar business in Formosa, now Taiwan. And so it was not a new industry for them. And the nation was starving. They could not grow enough food to feed the nation. They were in pretty bad shape. Just remember, this was all during the Great Depression. And so everybody who wanted a job and was a farmer, particularly people from Okinawa, if they wanted, they were given a free ride to Tinian. And once they got there, they were given a small acreage of land as a tenant farmer to grow sugarcane. And they ended up planting the entire island. By the time the United States forces decided to come to the Marianas, the entire island of Tinian, 95% of the arable land, that is land on which a crop could be grown, was planted. And the vast majority of that was planted in sugarcane. I think I sent you a photograph showing what Tinian looks like as a patchwork quilt. And that's where it got its name for Operation Forager. There in the background, you'll see the patchwork. That's among the very first of the plantations. That's the village of Songsong, Tinian Town, as it was, before the Americans arrived. The island had grown to a population of almost 18,000 people, not only living here in Tinian Town, but also in farming villages around the island. So this was right there in the front left lower section. You'll see where the sugarcane factory is, and then the train track leading out into Marpo Valley, and then going north all the way to the sugarcane fields in the north end of the island. So that's exactly how it came about. And the invasion of Tinian was given the name Tattersall's. I don't know if either of you remember that word, but I do remember my grandmother making patchwork quilts from old pieces of cloth, right? That's what tattersall's is. And when they looked at it at that time, what they saw was a patch. The planners with Nimitz at Pearl Harbor, what they saw was a patchwork quilt, tattersall's.
Well, and some of the people who watch this show have seen me in my Irish tattersall vest. So there's a good example of it. You know, so you brought us right to the invasion there. You write that Marine General Holland Smith called Tinian the perfect amphibious operation in the Pacific War. So what exactly made it so perfect?
That's a very good question, Rick. It was perfect for several reasons. First of all, our overwhelming firepower, right? And got to keep in mind that Saipan had to be invaded and captured first. Saipan and Tinian are only 3 miles apart. From the south end of Saipan, there you go, from the south end of Saipan to the north end of Tinian is only 2.75 miles. So you could not invade one without, at least neutralizing the other. So the invasion of Saipan took place on June 15th, 1944. And a gross error was made there in that they underestimated Japanese strength by 50%. Instead of 15,000 troops on the Saipan, the Japanese had 30,000 troops on Saipan, forcing the landing of the floating reserve, the 27th Infantry Division. But anyway, at the same time, they had to neutralize Guam. So an entire carrier subset task force was assigned to Tinian to keep their heads down and to just keep them under fire constantly until we could finish off Saipan and then begin the capture of Tinian. The capture of Tinian then was, the Marines had gotten beat up bad at the beaches on Saipan. 30% casualties, both the 2nd and the 4th Marine Divisions, with the 4th Marine Division getting the bad brunt of it. But anyway, they had suffered badly. They had 2 weeks after the island of Saipan was secured before the invasion of Tinian on July 24th. And during those 2 weeks, the Marines went up to their commanding general and said, do we always have to land right in the teeth of the enemy? Isn't there a better way to do this? Right? And so it just happened to be in the 4th Marine Division was a guy I'm pretty sure both of you have heard about, and that's Raider Carlson, right? The Colonel Carlson, who conducted the raid on Macon Island. And he was like Claire Chenault and Billy Mitchell and these other guys who were always 2 steps ahead of their generals and thinking. And his thinking was, you don't have to land in the teeth of the enemy. There's another way to do it. And so if you have a map of Tinian there that you can throw up, or even that other one, so you'll notice that Tinian town is down at the southern end of the island. There was no harbor at that time. This is a recent map, right? So there was just a long white sandy beach there. To Admiral Turner, there was no question that was the landing beach because it was plenty big to land 2 divisions abreast. But again, the hills back around Tinian town were full of 6-inch coastal defense guns. And the Marines knew that they were going to come under that fire again. And of course, all the time they had, there was going to be a lot of smaller stuff that would be hitting them at the beach as well. So Carlson came up with the idea of landing at these 2 tiny beaches up on the northwest end of Tinian with the 4th Marine Division, while the 2nd Marine Division conducted a fake landing down at Tinian town to draw all of the troops down there, the Japanese troops, for their traditional fight at the beach. In the meantime, this 4th Marine Division loaded into their landing vehicles on Saipan, on the beach there at southern, where Pacific Islands Club is now. Beautiful club, beautiful white sandy beaches. And so they loaded up there and simply skipped across the channel in the only shore-to-shore invasion of the Pacific War. And by the time the Japanese realized what happened down south, and they started, the Americans started turning around and leaving, and they were cheering that they had chased the Americans away, they had no idea that the 4th Marine Division was already on shore up north. And then the 2nd followed them, and by that evening, the entire 4th Marine Division and 1 battalion of the 2nd Marine Division were ashore on Tinian and took very few casualties. Well, relatively few compared to Saipan, let's put it that way, and be honest to the Marines that did make the initial landing there, who got shot up. So that's why Holland Smith called it the perfect amphibious invasion of World War II.
So Don, let's step back a bit. What is the strategic requirement that brings us there anyway for Operation Forager? So maybe describe what's driving us there. You pointed out to me many times. Talk a little bit about and carrying out this landing. I mean, you always tease me that it's only 80 miles across the English Channel for D-Day, but it's 3,000 miles to the Marianas. So here's your chance to talk about why the islands themselves are important and to give a plug to Forager.
Is this location?
Yes, and all right, a couple of other things are tied into the decision. In conducting the amphibious invasion, they were looking at what each island can give them. All right, they're not going to waste Marines capturing an island that won't serve their purposes in the long run. And remember, the long run for this whole thing was backed by Admiral Ernest J. King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet worldwide, right? And also by General Hap Arnold, commander of all the B-29s. Together, they agreed that if they captured the Marianas, they could build enough B-29 bases on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, all right, to be able to defeat the Japanese by aerial bombardment before an invasion of Japan became necessary. Now, Guam was taken because of Apra Harbor, all right, not necessarily because of its ability to launch B-29s, although we did end up putting 2 wings of B-29s on Guam after Saipan and Tinian. We took Saipan simply because you had to bust Saipan out of the way. It was the longest held of all the Mariana Islands, and it had become a vacation ground for Japanese. That's how big it was, and how solidly it was entrenched. So we had to knock the Japanese out of control. That's where Admiral Nagumo was. That's where, the power brass were, and that's where the concentration of troops were going to be, because the Japanese knew we would have to take it first. Tinian was taken simply because it was flat. It had no harbor. So that was a big negative. But Seabees and Marines, being Seabees and Marines, the Navy said, we'll get them ashore and we will build the bases, which they eventually did. So Guam was taken simply because it was flat enough to be able to hold 2 B-29 wings. And that's exactly what General Arnold wanted, and that's the reason why Tinian was captured. There you see the north end of Tinian. This is later on. This must have been towards
February 1945.
Yeah, 45, right? You can see that there are B-29s on the ground up at the north end, which would be to your left as you're looking at the screen. That's runway Able, originally called strip number 1. And if you look at the outline of the strip, you'll see a little triangular outline underneath of it. That's the old Japanese runway. As with almost all battles, the Marines and the Seabees and the Navy had all learned that the first thing they could do, and the most valuable thing they could do, is rebuild what the enemy had, what we had taken from the enemy. So there was a runway there. They simply had to extend it 2,000 feet in both directions to get it up to 8,500 feet, the length necessary for B-29 operations. And you can see that the planes parked up there to the left. You see those 2 Y-looking things, all right? Well, those are right inside the area. Those planes there, that was where the 509th Composite Group would be stationed, the guys that flew the atomic bombs to Japan on runway Able. By then, I think they've got, looks like 2 bomb groups on island.
I want to, before we go further, and I know we're zigzagging a little on time here, but I want to talk about the civilians on Tinian who go through this battle, what their experience is like, what it's like, after the battle, and especially because a number of them are Japanese civilians. This must have been a very, to say the least, it would have been a very eye-opening experience, but it was a pretty brutal experience for a lot of these people.
It was, I cannot describe accurately the horrible experience those innocent people had to go through, right? Because Japan brought the war to their wonderful island. They had been there for 30 years. Children and grandchildren had already been born there, many of whom come back to the island every year with the Micronesian Repatriation Association. But their terror began as early as February 1944, when the United States the Navy conducted its first raid on the Marianas and shot the place up, knocked out all radio communications, just blew the place up, primarily to get photographs and discover what was the strength of the Japanese at that time. Then again came the pre-invasion bombardment on June 11th, 1944. By then, these people have all been chased out of their homes. They're already living in the jungle, trying to find caves. There are no Chamorros on Tinian at the time. The Chamorros who were on Tinian had all been forced to move either to Rota or Saipan to get them out of the way.
Those are the natives,
yes, the indigenous population, the Chamorro, right? And so they were chased off the island by the Japanese to prevent them. They were afraid that, like the Guamanians, that perhaps they would have American-leaning feelings and disclose, strategic sites to the enemy, as soon as they landed or whatever. So they were all taken off the island. So there were 18 at the beginning of the battle. There were 18,000 Japanese on the island. 4,000 of them made it off of the island onto ships that had dropped off reinforcements and were heading back to Japan. Unfortunately, one of them, America Maru, was sunk by an American submarine. It was filled with Japanese and Okinawan civilians, but they would not put the International Red Cross on the sign of their ship, showing that it was an evacuation ship. And so they got sunk, and they all died. Many of them died anyway. So you had about 14,000 left on the island when it was invaded. About 11,500 ended up in the refugee camp after the island was captured. What happened to the rest of them? Nobody really knows. There's a early shot of Camp Chulu, the Japanese, Okinawan, Korean refugee camp on Tinian, and those huts down there that's all it is, and they were just scraped together with odds and ends of leftovers that the Seabees and the Marines were able to scrape around from around the island. You can see that the roofs on the huts are old used tin. There was no new encampment for these refugees, and they would live there the rest of the war. But again, going back to the original question about their survival, they spent from no less than from July or June 11th, 1944, the day the pre-invasion bombardment of the Marianas began, until July 24th, right, when the Marines landed on Tinian. So you got almost 6 weeks in the jungle. Many of them died of starvation and diseases. Many of them died from the bombardment. The bombardment was huge. You get anywhere, if they hit anywhere near a group of civilians with one of those giant 16-inch shells off of one of our battleships, they're all pink mist. I mean, there's nothing missing in action when that kind of thing happens. Those who did survive were immediately checked by American medical personnel, especially for diseases, keeping in mind that the Marines brought their own diseases. Those coming with the 2nd Marine Division out of Southeast Asia brought with them dengue fever. And the locals had massive, terrible cases of diarrhea, which can kill you. And several hook and worm disease, all kinds of diseases that they had picked up in the jungle. Many of the babies did not survive. Many of the elders did not survive. So it was a horrible, horrible experience for them. And in reading how the Seabees and the Marines took care of these people was just heart-touching to me. Here were these Japanese being, coaxed out of their caves after knowing fully well that many of their countrymen, many of their fellow workers had committed suicide because it was the honorable thing to do, because the Marines were going to kill them all and eat their babies and all of that kind of crap. Bottom line was, now the ones who didn't jump are all of a sudden met by a Marine who gives them a drink of water, holds out his hand, helps him up out of the ground, gives him a little bite of his, can of his sea rations. They're not murdering people. Can you imagine how sick to their stomach they were when they realized that their countrymen had committed suicide needlessly, and even more so that their nation had lied to them through the whole time to keep them supposedly loyal to Japan. Fortunately, during the 2 years that they would spend in Camp Chulu, the Marines and the Seabees and all the people that in the camps, they ended up working in the camps, doing dishes, cleaning the camps, doing oddball things, and everybody treated them so good. I end up there's a photograph of the work shed, and these are Okinawans and Japanese, and that's where they're going, right, to work. Naval Air Base, 52nd NCB Naval Base, right? They're going to go to work there for their day. They're going to get paid. And we end up sending them at the end of the war. We ended up sending them home with cash in their pocket, and a smile on their face, and decent clothes to wear. So I consider our Marines and Seabees, who served on Tinian with Camp Chulu, as our very first ambassadors to Japan.
So, Don, we can bring in the Seabees into your answer here. But one of the other things that I find fascinating whenever I'm at Tinian is the evidence of the war is all around you, right? It's inescapable. Yeah. So you've talked about the civilians on the island, and you've talked about the Japanese occupation. Talk a little bit about the physical transformation of Tinian because of the Seabees. What does it? How did it change physically?
Begin with this. You have 15,000 Seabees with 1 million tons of dynamite. And they put it all to use. That is the major story of the first half of the book. Of course, some of the preliminary chapters build up to it, but here you got a photograph of them working on runway Able. They called it strip number 1 in the beginning, and that is a massive set of individual explosions on the area that would become the runway, because the coral was so hard, and there were dips and valleys in it and different kinds of coral in there. And so they literally had to blow it apart and then scrape it flat and then add to it and pack it and compact it to be able to create each of the 4 runways at Northfield, and then another 4 runways at Westfield, plus all of the connecting roads, plus all of the camps for 11,500 Seabees, 40,000 Army Air Force personnel, 20,000 for the 313th Wing at Northfield, and another 20,000 for the 58th Wing at Westfield, and then construct a harbor. It was just a massive operation. And so the sugarcane fields were bulldozed, turned into camps. Roads were put through. The railroad tracks were turned up and turned into cemented, eventually paved roads. It was a massive construction effort to create what became the largest operational air base in the world.
And there's a guy involved in this named Paul Halloran, who comes up in your book a few times. He's involved. He's involved in the invasion of Japan, I think, because invasion of Tinian, because he helps develop the doodle bugs, right? That they used for the landing. But talk to us a little bit about his role, because he this is a name that I was not familiar with before I looked at your book, and he's got a lot of mentions in there.
Well, and he deserves every single one of them. If any man has ever been under the pressure to perform under fire, it's Captain Paul J. Halloran, USN. He was the officer in charge of the 6th Naval Construction Brigade and had the responsibility of building all of the facilities that were on the original planning chart given to him when he got to Pearl Harbor for the planning sessions in April of 1944. And he was given a time frame in which to build these air bases and the roads connecting them and get the jobs done, all the side jobs that had to be done in support of that effort, the camps for the Seabees and all of that. But he dedicated himself night and day. There were complaints about him that he was not being overly friendly to his men, but they later realized that he was just under so much pressure from above, from Admiral Turner and from Admiral Towers, that he just had no time for a smile and a handshake. He expected his commanding officers of each of the 3 regiments to get their jobs done, and those commanding officers were responsible and had confidence in the commanders of each of the naval construction battalions under their command to get those jobs done. And so Halloran started on it in, like I said, April planning, and they gave him a map of Tinian, 2 maps, one a Japanese map that they had recovered, and then another map that was created after that first raid in April and continued to be modified. He looked at the map and he said, you know what? This looks just like my hometown. And of course, where was he born and raised? Manhattan Island, New York, New York. And so he, as the commanding officer, took the authority upon himself to name all of the roads and places on Tinian after the roads and places on Manhattan Island. And that's where we got Broadway and 8th Avenue, 86th Street, 125th Street, the University Club area. We've got Bronx, we've got the Battery. All of the places that you would find in New York City are on Tinian. So I think I started that book, or was it Tinian and the Bomb, with the statement, I live on East 46th Street, just off Broadway. And of course, to the blind reader, right, they're thinking New York City. And then I put -- on Tinian. Then I do. So I'm only, 15 minutes from Runway Able. So when I was writing the book, I used to go up there and sit under a big monkey pod tree that's there near the bomb pits. And I had already been to DC and collected all the photos and the documents. And so I would drive up there in my old beat up brown pickup truck with a card table in the back and of course a cooler. And I would, in all my, a handful of photographs, and I would sit under that tree and look at the photographs of the bombs being loaded from the bomb pit. And that's where I sat and wrote at least the draft of that chapter. It was just a wonderful experience. But to go back to Halloran, there was a couple of people who wanted him fired because they didn't think he could get the job done. But he did come through with it.
How long did it take? And this is a question from our
audience.
Right.
The biggest question was, when did we get the first B-29 on the ground? So that picture on the front of your book, I don't know if you have a picture of the back cover, or you can hold it up so they can see the back cover.
Maybe Chris can hold it up because I have it on my computer.
It's the back cover. There you go. That's the first B-29 to land on Tinian, and that happened on December 21st, right before Christmas. And that is the very first B-29 to land on Tinian. Those Seabees that are on there, right, were actually on the field. They were still leveling out the field and preparing it when that guy, Allsworth, came flying in on the deck with 2 of his buddies. In the front picture, you'll see that. With his buddies, right, his little group flew in first. And he comes screaming down the deck. And then here comes Jeeps chasing the Seabees off of the court. And they were so excited because they had been busting their buns ever since they landed, right, to try to get this strip ready on time. They made it on time because that plane had the nerve to chase them off the field and land on that dirt strip. And so they were from the 13th Naval Construction Battalion. That's why you see the 13th Black Cat logo painted on the side of it, and they adopted that aircraft as their pet B-29, sort of like. Those guys got the crew on that plane, they got treated real good the rest of the war. But anyway, what it shows is, these were a bunch of kids. they were 17, 18, 19 years old, a few old men at 21 or 22, right? And they were so excited because they've been, like I said, busting their buns to get this thing done. And there is what they've been fighting for. They had never seen a B-29. They didn't even know what it was. And so they clambered on top of that thing. They should have been home playing football and chasing cheerleaders. Instead, they're in the middle of the Pacific building bases for B-29s. And to me, I chose that picture for the front and back cover for those kids, right, that do that. And of course, every other plane that landed was the same way. The plane, even a B-29 carries 11 men. That's a football team. Some of them played for Green Bay, maybe. But anyway, bottom line is that they were just kids, but they got the job done and in terrible conditions. They had to go through the rainy season, trying to dig out and build runways. It was a tough job, and I just wanted to give credit to those young men. Almost all of them are gone now. We rarely see, living veterans come in our way anymore. Chris, you know that as much as well as I do. So I just wanted to give credit to those kids.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question? Oh, Halloran, yeah. As they started finishing up and receiving planes at Westfield, right, another one of his accomplishments on time, he was promoted to Commodore. So he was given he was finally given credit, and those that wanted to fire him finally said, "You did a good job."
So, Doug, I mean, it's kind of hard to take it all in because, again, there's just so much in the book, and you touch on so many things. And we're going to put up an address where folks can order the book before we're done here.
Thank you.
But you say in the book that for 1 year, it is the most important and valuable piece of real estate on Earth. So yes, we've touched on this a little bit. So justify that statement.
I'll try to make that clear. First of all, the bombing techniques changed during the war. All right, when LeMay took over the B-29s in the Marianas in January 1945, and he was told that if he had replaced Possum, all right, who had been commander of the 73rd Wing on Saipan and commander of the 21st Air Force. But he got fired because he insisted on high altitude precision bombing, and he just wasn't hitting the target. They weren't knocking planes out. There was too much airstream at that altitude, 30,000 feet. So LeMay started sending them in low altitude with incendiary bombs. And of course, I'm sure that everybody's read about the burning of Tokyo and all those 54 cities that those B-29s did. And the vast majority of that bombing came from the two B-29 wings on Tinian. But then there was another technical development, and that was the ability of B-29s to be able to drop aerial mines, right? One of the goals to force surrender was to cut off the flow of all materials coming from Asia into Japan. And that included their food supplies. So by bombing, submarines did the best they could. But submarines are small and they only carry a few torpedoes. And if they're not successful on, that run, they have to go all the way back to Pearl Harbor to rearm and refuel and get back into the field. Now they could do that same thing in Apra Harbor. But even so, their ability was limited by the number of submarines and the number of torpedoes they could carry. On the other hand, once LeMay got these aerial torpedoes, well, you can send as many B-29s as you want up there, all right, and drop those aerial mines in the harborways, the entryways into Japan, and prevent any ships from either leaving or coming in. And that's exactly what they did. And so they closed down the entryways and caused Japan to enter a period of starvation. Had the war not ended when it did, if we had not used the atomic bombs, we could have just said, "No, we're not going to use the atomic bombs. We'll just burn them to death and starve them to death," which I guess would have won the war with time. And the problem is there was still a war going on in China too, right? There were 5,000 people dying every day up at the time that we used the atomic bombs. So the starvation, the blockade of Japan became successful because of the B-29s. All of that was done by B-29s from Tinian, by the way. And then the 58th wing, which was the first wing into operation, that's the one that flew to China and then came back and went to Westfield on Tinian. They were very experienced, and they were used. LeMay used them extensively for the firebombing missions. So all I'm saying is that more B-29s did more work on the island of Tinian alone than either Saipan or Guam.
There's a lot of... Oh, go ahead, Don. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, I was just asking Chris if that answered his question.
No.
And yes,
Yeah,
I think it did. Hey,
yes,
we're just about out of time, Don. We haven't even been able to talk about the atomic bomb effort, which is a huge part of the story. You go into tremendous detail about the bombing that comes in off of Tinian, and so much more. I just want to ask give me a quick answer to this one, which is what's there today and how are the Americans remembered? And I know it's a big question. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, and I'm going to add on to Rick's question, and you can maybe touch on talking about the island today. It seems to be coming back in importance, doesn't it?
Yes. Let me try to answer that quickly in two pieces.
You have 3 questions in 90 seconds. Go.
Okay. Number one, the people of Guam are Americans, and they are patriotic. So they remember that their island was responsible, right, for dropping the atomic bombs. And we, the people of Tinian, appreciate that, but we also use it quite effectively, right, to bring tourists to our island. And I've had the pleasure, the honor to serve many tours, other than the military historical tours every year during the Iwo Jima reunion, right? But I've had Japanese from Hiroshima, Japanese from Nagasaki, and a variety of different people come here, and they are quite polite to the locals, and the locals are polite back to them. So the atomic bombs and the bomb pits are an important part of Northern Marianas history. Now to go to your second part of it, right, Chris? Yes. Right now, there is almost $1 billion in contracts that have been let out by the Department of Defense, both Navy and Air Force, for another reconstruction of Tinian. They took runway Echo from Westfield, and they're using that to build what they call a divert facility for the Air Force. Essentially, what they did was admitted that they don't have enough space at Anderson Air Force Base to park sufficient number of large refueling aircraft. So they're taking runway Echo. They're not resurfacing the runway. They are simply creating a parking lot there for about a dozen of these giant air-to-air refueling aircraft. And they will have exercises here once every 8 weeks, something to that effect. And they'll bring in a dozen of these refueling tankers to practice refueling with our allies. And that is the biggest training program that is ongoing now on Tinian. And that is learning how we can work together with pilots from different countries doing their job. Should we have to do it? Should we be forced into another war? And so we see Japanese and Australian aircraft here and training exercises. Northfield is now underway of being stripped. All of the runways are being stripped by an Air Force Red Horse team. And the Red Horse was created during the Vietnam War as a construction arm of the United States Air Force, just as the Seabees are to the United States Navy. So they are in the process now of stripping all those runways. They're going to resurface all the runways and all of the roadways and the military leased lands on Tinian, which is the northern 2/3 of the island. There are no plans to station permanent military personnel on the island of Tinian. They're going to be stationed in Guam or elsewhere, and they will be brought to Guam, to Tinian if needed, which we hope, of course, will never happen, right? But they will have much larger training operations here. There are 5,000 Marines moving to Camp Blas on Guam, and they will be doing their practice training on the island of Tinian. But there will be no permanent station military personnel or aircraft on the island of Tinian.
Well, Don Farrell, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, you'll have an
today.
international airport.
Yeah.
No, we do not have an international airport. The Commonwealth Ports Authority decided that money was more important on Saipan. So Tinian will all, when the construction's all done and they all leave, Tinian will go back to its peaceful, sleepy place that I moved to 30 years ago.
Well, thank you so much for joining us from that sleepy, beautiful place and to talk about your book, Seabees and Superforts at War, Tinian's Critical Role in the Ultimate Defeat of Japan. And we want to mention that, let's see if we can bring this up, that the book is available not on Amazon. Is that correct? It's not on Amazon?
We are having a little problem with Amazon because we are a territory.
Okay.
So
we don't need to go into detail, but the books, the way to get the book is this website that I've put up here. It's and I'll put it up in the comments too, in case you find it easier to get it from there. So everybody's going to see that. They can link to it. It's https://shop.micronesianpubs.com. And that is how you get Seabees and Superforts at War.
And you definitely need to get it.
Yeah, it's also on eBay now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but you're not going to get any, unless you're selling it on eBay, you're not going to get the royalties from that. So you want to have them buy a version where you're going to get the royalties.
I think my son is taking care of that problem.
Okay.
And when does your first Colonel Sanders revival commercial come out, Don?
Richard's been talking to me about setting up a blog, and I said only if I'm not going to be on air.
Well, it's a great looking beard, Don, and and the Green Bay hat looks good. And I don't know, whatever was bothering your internet image before, you're clear as crystal now.
Yeah, I have no idea.
So,
but, like I said, we live in a territory.
The internet is a very mysterious thing. Don Farrell, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Chris.
Okay,
there we go.
We're back.
We're still here in Boston.
And next week, after 5 weeks of encore episodes,
yes,
we will be back live.
How?
And our guest will be Joel Bohe, who is the author of Bullet Strikes on the First Day of the American Revolution.
And it'll be a special show because it will be the first time?
First time that we've done a live show with a live guest together. And
since, as you know, we have somewhat differing views of this particular event, it will be interesting to see if we can all get along together in the same.
We'll be fine.
We'll be friends right now. We'll be friends
right now. But we'll also, I think, try to have some pictures, maybe some video from this trip because, here we are. We're out here all week with 60 people, many of whom are History Happy Hour viewers. We want to, those of you who are not on the trip, we want to give you a sense of what happened.
And make sure, check out the book because Joel has done some really fascinating work on the archaeology that they've been doing at Lexington and Concord and some of the new things they found about the battle from the dig. And
he's a speaker to our group on a couple of different days. Yep. So you'll be kind of participating in the tour by doing that, by joining us next week.
Virtual tour.
So thank you for watching, and follow us on Facebook, shout at us on Twitter, and back us on patreon.com.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe.